A heavy summer night in the outskirts of Memphis, 1968. The streets are still, the cicadas loud, until silence is shattered by the metallic thud of steel against asphalt and the sharp sputter of a Cadillac Fleetwood gasping its last breath. The car stalls in the middle of a narrow crossroads, its chrome catching the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. The air smells of gasoline and overheated metal. The driver steps out, tall, lean, restless. White trousers, dark glasses, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. To the few who might pass, he looks like just another man stranded in the night. But he isn't. From the shadows comes the sound of bare feet on pavement. A boy, no more than 10, tired from hauling crates at the market, is making his way home. He slows, his eyes catching the Cadillac, then the figure beside it. His heart kicks. Everyone in town knows that car. He doesn't yet understand that the stranger before him is Elvis Presley himself, and he certainly doesn't know that in the next few minutes, a broken engine will ignite a chain of events that will mark his life forever. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The streets of Memphis lay almost deserted under the weight of the humid southern night. Neon signs flickered in muted pinks and blues, buzzing faintly over shuttered diners and empty gas stations. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train moaned, its whistle cutting through the still air. It was the kind of hour when the city seemed to belong to shadows, not people. Down Union Avenue, a long black Cadillac glided past the quiet storefronts, its chrome flashing in the sparse glow of streetlights. Inside, Elvis Presley gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. He had just left American Sound Studios after another grueling late-night rehearsal. His voice was raw, his body aching, his mind crowded with songs that weren't yet finished, but demanded to be born. He had driven alone tonight. No bodyguards, no hangers-on, no Colonel Parker. Those rare moments of solitude were his secret indulgence, even if they came with risk. Elvis liked feeling human again, just a man behind the wheel, windows down, wind on his face. But as he turned a corner, the car lurched. The engine coughed once, then sputtered. A few yards later, the Cadillac gave up entirely with a hollow shudder, coasting to silence under the orange haze of a broken street lamp. For a second, Elvis just sat there, his reflection ghostly in the windshield. Then, with a sharp exhale, he slammed the gear shift into park and pushed open the heavy door. The night swallowed him whole. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. Sweat clung to his temples despite the breeze. He tugged the collar of his shirt, stepped around to the front, and popped the hood. The metallic creak echoed in the emptiness. He stared into the tangle of wires and metal, the heart of the machine that had carried him through countless nights. But Elvis was no mechanic. He knew music down to its marrow, but engines were another language entirely. After a few moments of futile tinkering, he gave up, tossing the keys onto the leather seat with more force than necessary. He pulled out a cigarette, struck a match, and let the smoke curl slowly into the darkness. For once, he didn't feel like the king. He just felt like a tired man stuck on the side of the road. Unseen in the shadows of a nearby alley, a boy of about 10 watched him. The child had recognized the car long before its engine died. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that long black Cadillac with its gleaming trim. It wasn't just a car. It was a legend on wheels, a story whispered on porches and street corners. That's the kind Elvis Presley drives. The boy's clothes hung loose on his small frame, patched in places with mismatched fabric. His sneakers were scuffed almost to the sole. He'd been walking home from a late errand, carrying a bundle of old tools his father used at the factory. When he saw the Cadillac roll to a stop, curiosity pinned him in place. At first, he didn't dare move closer. What if the man by the car wasn't really him? What if he was just imagining it? But when the figure stepped fully into the light, cigarette glowing in the dark, the boy's breath caught. It was him, Elvis Presley. Flesh and blood, standing no more than 20 feet away. For a while, the boy simply watched. Elvis leaned against the fender, shoulders slouched, smoke curling around his profile. There was no trace of the glittering star from television. He looked restless, maybe even lonely. The boy's heart pounded. His father had shown him how to handle tools, how to listen to an engine's complaints. He knew a little, not much, but enough to recognize the sound of loose wiring, the smell of a bad connection, and he couldn't shake the thought, maybe I can help him. It took every bit of courage he had, but finally he stepped out of the shadows, clutching a bent screwdriver in one hand. His voice came out small, barely above a whisper. "Sir, I think I might know what's wrong. My daddy taught me a few things about engines." Elvis turned his head, surprised. For an instant his eyes narrowed, a stranger, appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the night. But then his expression softened. The boy wasn't a threat, just a skinny kid with wide eyes and trembling hands. A slow smile tugged at Elvis's lips. He took another drag from his cigarette, then nodded. "All right, little man," he said quietly. "Show me what you got." The boy's legs felt like rubber, but he approached. He set his tool bundle down, pushed himself up on tiptoe, and peered under the Cadillac's hood. He reached in with a confidence that surprised even him, brushing aside wires, tightening a loose clamp with the makeshift screwdriver. Then, fishing a scrap of wire from his pocket, the kind he always kept because you never knew when it might come in handy, he twisted it carefully around a contact that had come loose. Elvis watched, arms folded, smoke trailing from between his fingers. At first there was amusement in his eyes, but then it shifted to something else. Admiration. The boy wasn't fumbling. He knew what he was doing. After a few minutes, the boy stepped back, wiping sweat and grease onto his sleeve. "Try it now," he said softly. Elvis arched an eyebrow, flicked his cigarette to the pavement, and slid back into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared to life, deep and steady, like a giant waking from sleep. The headlights blazed forward, cutting through the night. Elvis laughed, a full, genuine laugh, rich with relief. He leaned out the window, eyes shining. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You really are something, kid." The boy grinned, but his cheeks flushed crimson. He had just fixed Elvis Presley's Cadillac. He would never forget this moment if he lived 100 years. Elvis killed the engine again, stepped out, and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You just saved me a long walk tonight. What's your name?" the boy told him, voice trembling. "Well," Elvis said, "it's too late for you to be wandering around out here alone. Let me give you a ride home. You've earned it." Before the boy could protest, Elvis opened the passenger door with a gentleman's sweep, as though the child were a guest of honor. Hesitant at first, the boy climbed into the leather seat. It smelled faintly of smoke, cologne, and the mysterious world of adulthood. The dashboard glowed softly with amber light. When Elvis slid behind the wheel and the Cadillac purred to life again, the boy felt as though he had stepped not just into a car, but into another world, one that most people only dreamed of. And as the Cadillac pulled smoothly back onto the road, the boy pressed his hands against the cool leather seat, trying to steady his racing heart. The night outside was still dark and heavy, but inside the car, It felt like he was gliding through a dream that was only just beginning. The Cadillac glided back onto the empty street, headlights carving two golden lanes through the darkness. Inside the car, the air felt thick with silence. Not uncomfortable, but charged, as though both passengers were aware they were living a moment that would never be repeated. The boy sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. The seat beneath him was soft, unlike anything he'd ever known. The hum of the engine vibrated through his body, steady and reassuring. Beside him, Elvis leaned back into the leather, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping lightly against his thigh in rhythm with some tune that only he seemed to hear. From the dashboard, a faint hiss rose as the tape deck clicked and played. A rough recording filled the space, a voice carried by grainy fidelity. It wasn't a polished studio track. It sounded raw, unfinished, like something meant only for private ears. The boy tilted his head, curiosity breaking through his nervousness. "Who's singing that?" he asked, his voice timid but clear in the cocoon of the Cadillac. Elvis's lips twitched into the smallest grin. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "That?" he said after a beat. "Just a friend of mine." The boy didn't push further, but he listened intently, letting the voice fill him, not realizing he was hearing the very man sitting beside him. The melody carried something unguarded, almost fragile, far removed from the grand stages and screaming crowds the world associated with Elvis Presley. As the car rolled through dim neighborhoods, the boy began to relax. Words spilled out of him like water from a bucket tipped too far. He spoke of his father, who worked long shifts at the Cotton Gin, coming home with hands so raw that he winced even holding a fork at supper. He told of his mother, often bedridden, her cough echoing through the thin walls of their house. He admitted how sometimes, when the bills stacked too high, he would shine shoes near Beale Street or carry groceries for nickels just to keep food on the table. Elvis didn't interrupt. He only listened, his profile lit occasionally by the flare of passing street lamps. Every detail the boy shared tugged at something deep inside him. In those words, he heard echoes of his own boyhood. The days when his mother ironed strangers' laundry to keep the lights on, when he himself walked to school in patched clothes, embarrassed by holes in his shoes. The Cadillac between them became a kind of time machine, transporting Elvis backward into memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. At one point, the boy hesitated, his gaze fixed on the blur of houses outside. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Sometimes at night, I go stand by those big gates down on Elvis Presley Boulevard, the ones with the notes painted on them. I just stare through the bars, wondering what it looks like inside." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I don't think I'll ever get in. Folks like me don't belong in places like that." The words hit harder than the boy could have imagined. Elvis gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather squeaking under his palm. For a second, he didn't trust himself to speak. The Cadillac slowed as it turned onto a narrower street, where houses leaned tiredly against one another, their porches sagging, their windows dim. Finally, Elvis pulled the car to a halt in front of a weather-beaten home, its paint flaking under the glow of the streetlight. The boy reached for the handle, ready to slip out quietly, but Elvis spoke, his voice low and steady. "Listen to me," he said. The boy froze, his hand hovering. Elvis turned fully now, his gaze sharp but not unkind. His tone carried a gravity that made the boy's chest tighten. "Don't you ever say you don't belong. You hear? You think those gates keep you out? They don't mean a damn thing. What matters is what you carry inside." The boy blinked, uncertain how to respond. Elvis leaned closer, his voice softening. "Promise me something. Promise you'll never stop believing in yourself. One day, doors will open for you. Doors you can't even imagine right now. And when they do, you walk through them. Don't hesitate. Don't let fear keep you on the outside looking in." The boy nodded slowly, though the weight of the words pressed down harder than anything he'd ever heard from a grown man. He managed a whisper, "I promise." Elvis studied him a moment longer, as though searching for proof of sincerity, then gave a small nod of satisfaction. "Good," he said simply. The boy slipped out of the car, the night air suddenly colder without the warmth of the Cadillac around him. He stood by the curb, watching as Elvis shifted the car into gear. The headlights washed over him one last time, painting his figure in gold. The Cadillac rolled forward, the sound of its engine fading into the stillness. The boy stood there long after it had disappeared, the promise still ringing in his ears. It felt less like a ride home and more like being handed a compass for the rest of his life. Inside the car, Elvis drove on in silence. The boy's words lingered with him, stirring something raw. He remembered his own nights staring at places he thought he'd never enter, dreaming of stages too big for a kid from Tupelo. And he thought about how strange it was that a chance encounter on a deserted road could tie two lives together with a thread invisible but unbreakable. The city lights dwindled behind him, swallowed by the dark. But Elvis felt, for the first time in weeks, that he had been reminded of why he sang at all. Not for the lights or the applause, but for people who needed to believe that even the smallest voice could be heard. The first rays of dawn filtered through the thin curtains of the small house, casting pale stripes across the wooden floorboards. A rooster crowed somewhere down the street, and the familiar rattle of milk bottles being set on a neighbor's porch echoed faintly. The boy stirred under a threadbare quilt, eyes still heavy from sleep, when his mother's urgent voice cut through the morning quiet. "Son, come here, quick!" There was something in her tone he had never heard before. Not fear exactly, but disbelief, as if she couldn't trust her own eyes. He scrambled out of bed, pulling on yesterday's shirt, and hurried to the front door. When he stepped onto the porch, he froze. There, parked at the edge of their dusty yard, stood a Cadillac. Not just any car, but a polished black beauty that shimmered even under the weak morning light. Its chrome reflected the sun like liquid silver. Dew clung to the windshield, glittering as though the car had been touched by something unreal. Neighbors were already gathering, drawn like moths to a flame. Men in work boots and women in aprons whispered among themselves, craning their necks to be sure of what they were seeing. Children pointed, wide-eyed, unable to contain their awe. The boy's mother pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Tears welled in her eyes. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. "How could this be?" The boy's own heart thundered. He moved closer, drawn to the machine as if pulled by invisible threads. On the hood, secured under the windshield wiper, was an envelope. The paper looked ordinary, but his fingers shook as he pulled it free. In uneven, hurried handwriting were just a few words. "Thank you for last night. E." The boy's breath caught. His vision blurred for a second. He read the words again and again, as if afraid they might vanish. Gasps rippled through the small crowd as he held the note aloft. "It is true," someone muttered. "Elvis Presley, right here in our street." His mother clutched his shoulders, her tears spilling freely now. For a woman who had spent years burdened by illness and endless bills, this sight was too much. She whispered, half to herself, "This could change everything." The boy opened the door to the car, the hinges groaning faintly. The smell of leather and cologne spilled out, rich and heady. He slid into the driver's seat, feeling as though he had entered another realm. His hands trembled as they rested on the steering wheel. He could barely breathe. The neighbors crowded closer, murmuring with excitement and envy. The boy ignored them. Something had caught his attention. The glove compartment sat slightly ajar, as if left that way on purpose. He tugged it open. Inside, nestled among registration papers, lay a cassette tape. On its label, written in the same hurried scrawl as the note, were 4 words: "For my little mechanic." His pulse quickened. With shaking fingers, he slid the cassette into the deck and pressed play. The tape whirred, clicked, then crackled. At first, there was only the sound of a guitar strumming softly, the chords tentative. Then came a voice, warm, unmistakable. Elvis's voice, carrying a melody that was unfamiliar, unlike anything the boy had heard on the radio. It was raw, unfinished, but beautiful in its imperfection. The crowd hushed, recognizing the sound. Children fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. The song ended, replaced by silence, and for a moment the boy thought that was all. But then the tape hissed again, and a voice spoke directly into the emptiness of the car. "If you're hearing this, it means our meeting wasn't just chance." The boy's mouth went dry. He leaned closer to the dashboard, as though the man himself were sitting there beside him. Elvis's recorded voice continued, calm, but weighted with something deeper. "Life has a way of putting people where they need to be, when they need to be there. Don't ever forget that. Hold on to what you believe in, because the world will try to take it from you." The tape clicked off, leaving only the stunned silence of the onlookers. The boy sat frozen, unable to move. His chest felt as though it might burst. He glanced at his mother, who had covered her mouth with both hands, her tears running freely. Around them, the neighbors whispered louder now, some in admiration, some in skepticism. But none of that mattered. Not the gossip, not the stares. For the boy, the world had shifted. What had begun as a chance encounter in the shadows of the night had now rooted itself firmly in daylight, undeniable and permanent. He pressed the rewind button, listening again to the words, committing them to memory as though they were scripture. And though his young mind could not fully grasp the weight of them, his heart understood. Elvis Presley had seen him, not just as a boy from a poor street, but as someone worthy of being remembered. When he finally lifted his eyes, the Cadillac gleamed back at him, silent and powerful. It was more than a car. It was proof. Proof that the impossible could pull up to your doorstep when you least expected it. And as the sun climbed higher, scattering gold across the rooftops, the boy realized he would never wake to an ordinary morning again. By midday, the story had spread across the block like wildfire. Word of the Cadillac outside the boy's house traveled faster than smoke in summer heat. Folks who had never before paid attention to the little family now strolled past, slowing their steps to stare at the gleaming car. Some tipped their hats politely. Others narrowed their eyes with suspicion. Admiration quickly soured into whispers. At first, the boy felt proud, standing on the porch while neighbors marveled. But pride turned to unease as their voices shifted tone. "That car's too good for folks like them," muttered one man as he leaned on his fence. "Maybe they got mixed up in something shady," another woman hissed, her eyes darting toward the boy's mother. In the schoolyard the next morning, the murmur grew sharper. Instead of curiosity, the other children's faces carried smirks. One older boy sneered, "Bet you stole it." "No way Elvis Presley gave you that." Another chimed in, "Or maybe your old man's running with gangsters." That's where it came from, huh? The boy clenched his fists, shame prickling his skin. He tried to defend himself, insisting it was the truth. But the more he protested, the louder the laughter grew. By lunchtime, he sat alone, staring at the ground. The Cadillac parked in his mind like both a miracle and a curse. At home, the atmosphere wasn't much lighter. His mother, pale and exhausted, wrung her hands constantly. She had heard the whispers, felt the stares. Her voice trembled as she spoke to her son over supper. Maybe it would be best if we returned it. Folks are already talking. We don't need trouble, not with your daddy working himself sick and me. She broke off, coughing into a handkerchief. The boy stared at his plate, appetite gone. The thought of giving up the car felt like tearing out the heart of everything that had happened. Yet, he couldn't bear to see his mother so frightened. The tension reached its peak 2 evenings later. A knock rattled the front door, firm and deliberate. His mother froze, the color draining from her face. On the porch stood a uniformed police officer, his hat tucked under one arm. His eyes flicked from the house to the Cadillac, then down to the boy. "Evenin'," the officer said flatly. "We've had a few calls. Folks say this here car doesn't rightly belong." The boy's stomach knotted. His mother stammered, trying to explain, but her voice faltered under the officer's skeptical stare. The officer stepped closer to the Cadillac, running a hand along its glossy surface. "Strange thing. A fine machine like this showing up outside a house with peeling paint. Mind telling me where you really got it?" The boy's throat tightened. He wanted to shout the truth, to say Elvis Presley himself had left it. But the words stuck. The officer's eyes bore down on him, sharp and doubting. "Son," the man said, his tone harder now, "stealing a car is a serious offense. You understand that?" Tears threatened to rise, but the boy held them back. His hands trembled at his sides. He thought of the cassette hidden in the glove box, Elvis's voice etched onto its tape. The only proof he wasn't lying. The officer tugged at the handle and opened the passenger door. The glove compartment, not closed properly after the boy's last listen, hung slightly ajar. Papers spilled forward, and among them, the cassette slid into view. The label caught the officer's eye. Elvis Presley. "For my little mechanic." The air shifted. The officer froze, his confident posture faltering. He picked up the tape with careful fingers, reading the handwriting once, twice, as though making sure he wasn't hallucinating. The color drained from his face. Silence stretched. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice suddenly subdued. "Well, seems I may have spoken too soon." He set the cassette back exactly as he'd found it, closed the door with unusual gentleness, and tipped his hat toward the boy's mother. "Apologies for the disturbance, ma'am. Enjoy your evening." Without another word, he strode off into the fading light, leaving behind only the crunch of gravel under his boots. The boy exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His mother slumped against the porch rail, relief written across her tired face. Yet, behind her eyes, worry still lingered. As the neighbor's curtains twitched and whispers resumed, the boy slipped back into the Cadillac. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the glove box where the tape lay hidden. The officer's sudden change of tone told him one thing clearly. The world would not believe easily. But he had proof. More than that, he had a connection no one could erase with rumors or suspicion. And as the engine ticked softly in the cooling night air, he vowed he would never let anyone convince him otherwise. That night, the boy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked with every gust of wind, the sound of his mother's coughing drifting faintly through the thin wall. Outside, The Cadillac gleamed under the moon, its chrome glowing like a sentinel in the dark. But it wasn't the car that kept him awake. It was the cassette. After the officer's visit, he had listened to it again and again, drawn not just to the song, but to the words Elvis had left like a hidden message. The voice that emerged after the music, low, hushed, almost conspiratorial, seemed meant for him alone. If you ever feel lost, if the world pushes you down, go back to where we first met. Some doors open only for those who believe. The boy replayed that line over and over in his head. Was it a riddle? A promise? Or simply something Elvis had said without thinking? A scrap of thought left behind on tape? By midnight, he couldn't resist any longer. He pulled on his shoes, slipped the tape into his pocket, and crept outside. The night smelled of honeysuckle and distant rain. He moved quietly past the sleeping houses until he reached the crossroad where the Cadillac had broken down. The silence here felt heavier, almost expectant. Crickets chirped in steady rhythm, and somewhere an old dog barked once, then fell quiet. The boy stood at the edge of the road, feeling foolish yet strangely compelled. Minutes passed. Then, faintly, the growl of an engine reached his ears. Headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Not the sleek lines of the black Cadillac, but a longer, darker shape. As the vehicle rolled closer, he saw it clearly. A limousine with tinted windows, polished and imposing. The car slowed as it approached him. His heart hammered. He thought of running, but his legs refused to move. The window on the rear passenger side slid down with a quiet hum. Inside sat a man he recognized instantly, not Elvis, but one of the guards he had seen countless times at the gates of Graceland. The man's expression was unreadable, but his presence left no doubt. "Kid," the guard said in a low voice, "Mr. Presley asked me to give you this." He extended a white envelope through the window. The boy stepped forward cautiously, his fingers brushing the guards as he took it. The limo's engine purred, ready to depart. The man added, "He said you'd understand." Then the window rose, shutting off the view. A moment later, the limousine glided away, its taillights shrinking into the night, until they disappeared altogether. The boy tore the envelope open right there under the street lamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small ticket. The note was written in hurried block letters. "Come tomorrow. American Sound Studios. Show this at the door." The ticket beneath bore the studio's name, stamped with the words, "Private Session. Admittance by permission only." His hands shook as he clutched both items. This was no dream. This was a door swinging open just as Elvis had promised. He ran home, his breath ragged with excitement. He tucked the envelope under his pillow, afraid to leave it anywhere else, as though someone might steal it away. For hours, he lay wide-eyed in the dark, imagining what awaited him. The studio where legends were born. The place where music that traveled the world first came to life. By the time dawn painted the sky pink, the boy still hadn't slept. But his exhaustion was nothing compared to the fire in his chest. He understood now. The car, the cassette, the words on tape. They weren't random. They were steps, like stones across a river, leading him somewhere bigger than he could yet imagine. And tomorrow, he would take the next step. The next morning felt like stepping into another reality. The boy rose before the sun, washed his face in the cold basin water, and carefully tucked the envelope into his pocket as though it were a treasure map. His mother asked where he was going so early, but he only kissed her cheek and whispered, "I'll be back later." She gave him a tired smile, unaware of the weight he carried in his hands. The walk to American Sound Studios seemed endless. He passed rows of warehouses, faded billboards, and the smell of diesel from trucks rumbling by. Yet with every step, his heart beat louder, urging him forward. When he finally reached the squat brick building, his courage nearly faltered. The studio looked plain, almost unremarkable, but he knew it held the kind of magic people traveled across the country to find. At the door, a man in a sport coat blocked his way, his arms crossed. "Can't come in here, son. Private session." The boy fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the envelope. Inside, the ticket gleamed with its stamped letters. He held it up with trembling hands. The guard squinted, then frowned. Not in suspicion, but in recognition. Slowly, he stepped aside. "Go on in." "Don't touch anything you ain't supposed to," he muttered. The boy slipped inside, and the world changed. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke, wires coiled across the floor like snakes. Microphones dangled on long cords, their metal gleaming under low lights. The smell of coffee and sweat mixed with the sharp tang of hot amplifiers. Musicians stood in small clusters, tuning guitars, testing drums, adjusting sheet music. Their voices rose and fell, punctuated by bursts of laughter and frustration. And at the center of it all, Elvis Presley. He wasn't dressed like the man on magazine covers. No glittering suits, no polished stage smile. He wore a plain shirt damp with sweat, his hair messy, his expression fierce with concentration. He leaned over a sheet of lyrics, tapping his foot as he hummed a line, then shook his head sharply. "Again," he said to the band. "We gotta find the truth in it. Don't just play the notes, feel 'em. Folks can smell a lie a mile away." The musicians nodded, falling into position. The boy stood frozen in the shadows, hardly daring to breathe. He was close enough to hear the scrape of a pick against guitar strings, the rasp of Elvis's voice as he worked through a phrase. It was like watching a storm gather its power. The band launched into the song, drums rattling, bass rumbling deep in his chest. Elvis gripped the microphone, his whole body moving with the rhythm. His voice rose, raw, unguarded, powerful enough to rattle the walls. The boy's eyes widened. He wasn't hearing the polished icon of radio. He was witnessing creation itself, the very moment music was forged from sweat and stubborn will. Minutes later, the take ended. Elvis waved the band silent, frustration etched across his face. He paced the room, muttering under his breath, then looked up, and his eyes found the boy. For a beat, everything stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. The musicians turned, following Elvis's gaze. Who was this kid hiding in the corner? The boy's heart seized. He wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him. Then Elvis smiled, not the showman's grin, but a genuine spark of recognition. He set down the microphone and crossed the room in a few strides. Placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, he said with quiet pride, "My little mechanic came after all." The tension in the room broke. Musicians exchanged puzzled glances, but none dared question. Elvis crouched slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "Come on," he said. "If you're here, you ought to hear it right." He guided him toward the front of the studio. The boy's knees shook as Elvis pulled over a tall stool and lifted him up to sit near the microphone. The band watched, waiting for a cue. Elvis turned to them, his voice firm. "Let's give my friend here the full picture, from the top." And just like that, the music roared to life again. The boy sat inches from the center of it all, the crash of cymbals vibrating through his bones, the harmonies wrapping around him like waves. Elvis sang with even more fire this time, glancing at the boy as though to prove every word carried weight. The boy clutched the edge of the stool, eyes wide, his heart soaring. He wasn't an outsider peering through the gates anymore. He was inside, witnessing the making of something the world would one day know, and it was happening with him there. When the song ended, Elvis laughed, his exhaustion melting for a moment. He tousled the boy's hair and said, "Now you can tell folks you heard it before anyone else." The boy could only nod, his voice lost in awe. For the rest of his life, he would never forget that room. The smoke, the cables, the electricity in the air, and the man who chose to share it all with a boy who had once fixed a car on a lonely night. After the session, the studio slowly emptied. Musicians packed away instruments, cables were coiled, and cigarette smoke thinned into the rafters. The boy lingered in the corner, still caught in the spell of what he had just witnessed. His ears rang with the last echoes of Elvis's voice, his chest still thrumming as though the music had imprinted itself inside him. Elvis motioned for him to follow, guiding him toward the narrow hallway that led to the dressing rooms. Away from the others, the atmosphere grew quieter, more intimate. The corridor smelled of coffee and hairspray, its walls lined with faded posters and scuffed paint. Inside a small dressing room, Elvis dropped into a chair, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror rimmed with buzzing lights. He rubbed his temples, fatigue visible in every line of his face. Yet, when his eyes shifted to the boy, the weariness softened. "Sit down, son," Elvis said, pointing to a battered wooden chair. The boy obeyed, clutching his knees. Elvis leaned forward, his voice quieter now, stripped of performance. "You got a good heart," he said. "That night with the Cadillac, you didn't think about who I was. You just wanted to help. That's rare. Don't lose it." The boy swallowed, words stuck in his throat. He wanted to tell Elvis everything, about his mother's illness, about the loneliness at school, about how this moment felt like a crack of light in a long tunnel. But before he could speak, the door creaked open. A heavy-set man in a sharp suit stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a shadow. His face was stern, his eyes calculating. The boy had seen his type before, men who carried authority without needing to raise their voices. "Elvis," the man said flatly, "what the hell is this?" The warmth in the room evaporated. Elvis straightened, his jaw tightening. "He's a friend." "A friend?" The man's gaze slid to the boy, cold and dismissive. "You can't drag some kid off the street into a closed session. Do you have any idea what happens if the press finds out? They'll spin it into a circus. You'll be accused of losing control. We're trying to keep your image sharp, not muddy it with strays." The boy felt the sting of that word like a slap. He lowered his head, shame flooding him. Elvis's eyes hardened. "Don't talk about him that way." The man stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not his tone. "You've got contracts, appearances, a schedule that bleeds you dry. The last thing you need is to waste time playing hero to some poor kid. Think about your career, not your conscience." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The boy wanted to vanish. He slid off the chair, muttering, "I should go." He reached for the door, but Elvis rose and caught his arm gently. The room's tension was a storm around them, but Elvis's voice cut through it, steady, protective. "Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small," he said to the boy. "Not him, not anyone. You understand?" The boy's eyes stung with unshed tears, but he nodded. The suited man scoffed, adjusting his cufflinks. "This is reckless. You're letting feelings get in the way of business. You want to end up broke? Forgotten?" Elvis turned, his face inches from the man's, his voice low but unshakable. "I'd rather be forgotten than forget who I am." The words hung in the air, electric. The man glared, then shoved the door open wider. "Fine, do what you want. But when this blows up, don't say I didn't warn you." He strode out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The boy stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or follow. Elvis released a slow breath, then crouched again to meet his eyes. His anger melted into something softer, almost paternal. "Listen," he whispered. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and pressed it into the boy's palm. "Tomorrow. Early. At this address. Don't tell a soul." The boy opened his hand, staring at the scribbled writing, his heart pounding. "Some things are bigger than contracts and crowds," Elvis said. "You'll see." The boy wanted to thank him, but words failed. Elvis gave his shoulder a firm squeeze, a look of reassurance that said more than speech ever could. When the boy finally stepped out into the night air, the studio behind him already quiet, he felt torn between fear and exhilaration. The manager's cold dismissal still echoed in his ears, but stronger than that was the echo of Elvis's vow. "I'd rather be forgotten than forget who I am." For the boy, that single line became a shield. Tomorrow, at the address on the folded paper, another door was waiting. The boy barely slept. The folded scrap of paper lay under his pillow, burning like a secret too big to hold. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elvis's face in that dim dressing room, heard the steady promise in his voice. "Tomorrow. Early. Don't tell a soul." When the first light crept across the horizon, he was already dressed, shoes tied too tight, hair combed flat with water from the kitchen basin. He slipped out quietly, careful not to wake his mother, and began the long walk through the hushed streets. The address scribbled on the note was no mystery. He knew it by heart. Everyone in Memphis did. Graceland. By the time he reached Elvis Presley Boulevard, the sky had warmed to pale gold. Usually the gates of Graceland teemed with fans, women with cameras, men hoping for autographs, children pressed against the iron bars painted with musical notes. But this morning was different. The road was nearly empty, and the gates stood silent, their ironwork glinting faintly. A single guard waited at the entrance. The boy's chest tightened as he approached, clutching the paper in his pocket like proof of belonging. The guard gave him a long, appraising look, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Without a word, he swung the gate open just wide enough for the boy to slip through. The sound of the gate closing behind him was final, like the click of a lock. For the first time, he was inside. The grounds stretched out before him. Rolling lawns still wet with dew. Tall oaks spreading shade. The long drive curving toward the white pillared mansion that seemed both imposing and strangely quiet. He moved slowly, drinking in every detail. The pool glimmering beyond the hedges, the horses shifting in their stables, the faint strains of a piano drifting from somewhere inside. The mansion's front door opened, and Elvis himself stepped out, not in rhinestones or tailored suits, but in a simple robe, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. His hair was tousled, his eyes still heavy from lack of sleep. Yet when he saw the boy, his face lit with genuine warmth. "Morning, little mechanic," he called. "Come on up." The boy's legs felt weak, but he climbed the steps, the marble cool under his worn shoes. Elvis set down his mug and clapped him gently on the back. "You've seen the stage lights," Elvis said, "but this is the other side of life. Welcome to my home." He led the boy around the mansion, showing him rooms filled with guitars, walls lined with gold records, shelves stacked with books and trinkets from around the world. But nothing felt distant or untouchable. Elvis spoke not like a king showing off his palace, but like a man eager to share pieces of his story. Finally, he gestured toward a side building. The garage. With a jangling of keys, he pushed the door open. The scent of oil and rubber hung in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of wax polish. Inside, rows of Cadillacs gleamed under dim lights. White, red, midnight blue. But Elvis bypassed the flashier models and walked to the far corner, where a faded blue car sat quietly, its paint dulled, its seats worn smooth. "This one," Elvis said, resting his hand on the hood. "She's no showroom beauty anymore, but she was my first that ever meant something." He looked at the boy, his eyes serious now. "And I want you to have her." The boy's breath caught. "Me? I can't." Elvis shook his head. "Not to show off, not for people's envy, but as a reminder. This old car carried me out of places I thought I'd never escape. When you sit behind the wheel, I want you to remember you can always drive past whatever's trying to hold you back." Tears stung the boy's eyes. He shook his head fiercely. "I can't take it. It's too much." Elvis crouched down so their eyes met. His voice softened, almost fatherly. "Then don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as a promise. When life tries to break you down, you'll keep moving anyway, even if the wheels are falling off." The boy blinked rapidly, fighting the lump in his throat. He nodded. Elvis smiled, satisfied. He ruffled the boy's hair, then pressed the car keys into his palm. "Good. Now, let's go get some breakfast. You ever had pancakes at Graceland?" The boy laughed through his tears, clutching the keys so tightly the metal bit into his skin. He knew then that no matter what came next, this morning, walking through those gates, standing in that garage, hearing those words, would mark him forever. The next morning began with a strange hush, as though the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The boy awoke to voices outside, a low rumble of curiosity building at the edge of their yard. He rubbed his eyes, pulled on his shoes, and hurried to the porch. What he saw made him stop cold. A large shape, draped in canvas and tied down with ropes, stood in front of their house. Neighbors crowded around, their chatter rising with excitement. His mother was already outside, clutching her robe tight against the morning breeze, her expression torn between fear and wonder. The boy's hands shook as he stumbled forward. Together, he and a few men from the street tugged at the ropes, peeling away the heavy tarp. Piece by piece, the covering fell back, until the truth gleamed in the sunlight. A weathered blue Cadillac, the same one from Elvis's garage. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The car looked older, less polished than the black one Elvis had left before. But it radiated something greater than shine. It carried history in its seats, miles in its tires, and meaning in every dent and faded mark. On the driver's seat rested a plain envelope. The boy tore it open, his heart thudding against his ribs. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, the handwriting unmistakable. "For my little mechanic. You reminded me that even broken things can keep moving. Never forget that. Elvis." The boy's vision blurred. He pressed the letter to his chest, unable to speak. His mother, standing beside him, wept openly, her hand covering her mouth. The crowd, which had mocked him days before, now stood in stunned silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Another joined, and soon the air filled with applause. Not the roaring cheers of a concert hall, but the heartfelt acknowledgement of neighbors who realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. One man, who had once accused the boy of lying, stepped forward and shook his head. "I'll be damned. He really did meet Elvis." The boy didn't respond. He moved instead to the car, opening the door with reverence. The hinges creaked, releasing the faint smell of old leather and gasoline. Sliding into the seat, He placed his hands on the steering wheel, the same one Elvis had once held, and felt a current of strength pulse through him. With trembling fingers, he turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life, rough but steady. The crowd fell quiet as a sound rose from the speakers, not the radio, not static, but a cassette already inside the deck. Elvis's voice filled the air, singing softly, almost intimately, as though meant only for the boy. "Keep on walkin'. Don't look back. The road is yours to find." The neighbors listened in reverent silence. The boy closed his eyes, letting the voice wash over him, a voice that now belonged not just to the world, but, in some mysterious way, to him. When the song ended, there was no applause, no chatter, only a stillness, heavy with meaning. The boy opened his eyes, looked at his mother, and saw pride shining through her tears. He understood then. The car was not merely a gift. It was a message made metal and wheels, a reminder that even when the world tried to shut its doors, there was always a way forward. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the boy sat behind the wheel, the cassette still warm in the player, Elvis's words echoing in his mind. The applause of neighbors would fade. The shine of the Cadillac would one day dull. But the promise, that invisible bond forged on a lonely night when a broken engine brought two lives together, would remain. And in that moment, he realized something deeper. Sometimes the smallest acts, fixing a wire, offering a hand, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways the world might never fully see. The Cadillac rumbled, steady and true. The boy gripped the wheel, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. He wasn't just a poor kid from a forgotten street anymore. He was someone who had been seen, lifted, believed in. Elvis Presley had given him more than a car. He had given him proof that miracles could park themselves right outside your door. And that was something no one could ever take away.